Chair of the Committee on Professional Conduct meeting and Secretary Treasurer for the board. Today we are having the March 21st, 2024 Committee on Professional Conduct meeting. Let's adjourn. Or I always do that. Let's begin. Okay, the CBA has provided the opportunity for the public to participate via the WebEx platform. When we take public comments, we will begin by taking public comment from those individuals attending the meeting at Sacramento location. I will then ask the moderator to open up the lines for public comment. You will be allotted up to 5 minutes for public comment. Okay, Ms. Reed, can we go ahead and take roll?
Doug Aguilera.
Present.
Nancy Corrigan. Nancy Corrigan, present. Christian Lotta.
Present.
Teresa Thompson.
Present.
Yen Tu.
Present.
And Evangeline Ward. Present. And we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. The CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority for the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. Moving on to our agenda item number 1. Do we have any public comments for items not on the agenda? Seeing none here in Sacramento. Moderators, do we have any public comment?
This is the moderator. I have opened a Q&A. Members of the public who are logged in on WebEx, if you would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, type the word comment in the text box, and make sure you send it to all panelists. You can also raise your hand if you call in by pressing *3. At this time, I see no requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, moderator, please close. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 2. Approve the minutes of the January 25th, 2024 committee meeting. Board members or committee members, do I have any comments or a motion? Ms. Tu?
Oh, never mind. I was not here, so I'm going to have to abstain from the minutes.
Okay.
Ms. Corrigan?
Yes, I move to adopt the minutes of the January 25th, 2024 committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corrigan. Do I have a second?
I second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. Here in Sacramento, do we have any public comments on agenda item number 2? Seeing none, moderator, please open Q&A for public comment.
Q&A is now open online. The instructions are on the screen. Just click the question mark inside of the square, type comment, send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, *3 to raise your virtual hand. At this time, I see no requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, moderator, please close public comment. Ms. Reed, can we take a vote?
Nancy Corrigan? Yes. Christian Lotta?
Yes.
Teresa Thompson?
Yes.
Yen Tu?
Abstain.
Evangeline Ward?
Yes.
And Doug Aguilera?
Abstain.
The motion carries.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Moving on to agenda item number 3, information on the adoption of the 150 semester unit requirement, California's mobility program, and the connection between semester unit requirements and mobility. Our licensing division chief, Michelle Center, will give us a presentation. Please proceed.
Good morning. I feel like I always get the prize for the longest title of my items, and so I'm not sure what the award is, but I feel like I've earned it. So we'll go ahead and start this morning with an item on mobility. So this is an information item. There's no action requested on this item. The purpose is to provide the CPC with the background of the current 150 semester unit requirement and how it relates to mobility and the concept of substantial equivalency. An understanding of the 150 semester unit requirement, mobility, and the connection between the two is particularly important at this time. This understanding will help guide CBA discussions, recommendations, and actions on such topics as initiatives that arise from the SURE CPA project and NASBA exposure drafts on additional substantially equivalent pathways to licensure. I'll begin by giving a brief overview of substantial equivalency, which is a concept developed by NASBA to simplify practice across states and is the foundation of mobility. NASBA defines substantial equivalency as a jurisdiction holding license requirements essentially equivalent to those outlined in the Uniform Accountancy Act, or UAA. Specifically, NASBA defines substantial equivalency as the completion of a baccalaureate and 150 semester units, passing the Uniform CPA examination, and 1 year of experience. This concept is often referred to as the 3 E's. Substantial equivalency was introduced to provide a foundation for CPA mobility and cross-border practice by building trust between jurisdictions. Once states enacted substantially equivalent requirements for entry into the profession, CPAs were able to practice across borders without providing notice and paying a fee. Next, let's take a look at the history of California's 150 semester unit requirement for licensure. Before January 1, 2002, the CBA provided 3 alternatives to qualify for CPA licensure. Depending on an applicant's educational qualifications, they would have a 24, 36, or 48-month experience requirement. As part of its sunset review in the year 2000, the CBA proposed significant modifications to its existing licensure processes to align it more closely with the UAA. The most notable proposed change to the licensure education requirements included a pathway that would require a baccalaureate degree and a minimum of 150 semester units. One of the primary concerns raised by stakeholders focused on the educational shifts the CBA proposed for licensure. Stakeholders voiced concern on the impact the transition to a single pathway with increased unit requirements would have on the pipeline. In response to these concerns, 2 pathways to licensure were established, one requiring 120 semester units and 2 years of experience, and one requiring 150 semester units and 1 year of experience. Additionally, the legislature established the ability for individuals to obtain licensure with general accounting experience. The new pathways became effective on January 1, 2002. Implementation of a 150 semester unit pathway meant that California, one of the last states to do so, was now considered a substantially equivalent state. However, NASBA warned California in 2009 that failure to remove the 120 semester unit pathway would result in the loss of its substantial equivalency status, which could have impacted California licensees' mobility across state lines. In response, substantial equivalency was enacted in 2009 that eliminated the pathway allowing licensure with 120 semester units. So the next sentence I have in bold, so it's emphasized. Okay. It is crucial to understand that the current 150 semester unit requirement for licensure was enacted specifically with the intent of maintaining substantial equivalency as defined by NASBA so that California CPAs could continue to realize the benefits of mobility with other states. In addition to eliminating the 120 semester unit pathway, the 150 unit requirement was modified to include 20 semester units of accounting study and 10 semester units of ethics study. The inclusion of the accounting study and ethics study requirements ensured that the additional 30 semester units required for licensure included coursework relevant to the profession. Next, I'll cover the evolution of California's mobility program. During the CPA's 2000 sunset review, the CBA, did I say CPA? It's CBA, sorry, reviewed its various statutes and regulations for conformity with the UAA. Prior to 2006, out-of-state licensees and accounting firms lawfully practicing in another state could temporarily practice in California incidental to their practice in another state, provided that the licensees or accounting firms did not solicit California clients or assert or imply that they were licensed to practice public accountancy in California. At the time, there was a movement occurring nationally to create a higher degree of substantial equivalency among states and increase the ability of licensees to engage in cross-border practice. To allow for increased cross-border practice, the legislature enacted the original practice privilege provisions in 2004. Beginning in 2006, the California Practice Privilege Law required out-of-state CPAs to file a written notice and pay a fee to the CBA to obtain a practice privilege. Practice privilege differed from a California license in that the individual could not have a principal place of business in California and had to file for a new practice privilege every year. The current mobility provisions became effective on January 1st, 2013, after the legislature removed the notice and fee requirements. Now, out-of-state licensees are granted a practice privilege if they meet certain requirements, including holding a CPA license from a state which the CBA determines has substantially equivalent education, examination, and experience requirements to California. The CBA designated these states when it adopted California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 5.5, which lists the substantially equivalent jurisdictions. So how does the 150 semester unit requirement relate to mobility? If a state were to change its educational requirements in a way that resulted in licensee standards falling below 150 semester units, NASBA would likely deem that state to no longer be substantially equivalent. The loss of a state's substantially equivalent designation may impact the ability of that state's licensees to engage in cross-border practice without an evaluation of the CPA's qualifications. Actions taken in California and other jurisdictions, as well as by NASBA, could impact licensees who wish to engage in mobility at the state level and may result in the need for evaluation of individual qualifications by each state board of accountancy. A CPA holding a license in good standing from a state listed in our California Code of Regulations, Section 5.5, may be eligible to engage in the practice of public accountancy in California under practice privilege without obtaining a California CPA license. Because substantially equivalent states are codified, that doesn't sound right. Is it right, Nancy? Nancy said I said it right. In CCR Section 5.5, if NASBA were to rescind any state's designation of substantial equivalency, it would not have an immediate impact on California's mobility provisions. A regulatory change would need to take place before another state would no longer be considered substantially equivalent in California. In addition to substantial equivalency, California's mobility provisions also provide for individuals to qualify by having practiced public accountancy for 4 out of the last 10 years, or by having individual qualifications evaluated by NASBA to determine if they are consistent with California's 150 semester unit pathway. There's more. The impact on CBA licensees if California were to modify its 150 semester unit requirement is unknown. In some instances, states that have not specified substantially equivalent jurisdictions in statutory or regulatory language may be able to move more quickly to prohibit mobility for a CPA from a state lacking substantial equivalency. Whereas in other states, the impact may be more gradual. This means that if California were to enact licensure requirements deemed by NASBA or other states as inconsistent with substantial equivalency, CBA licensees could experience greater obstacles to engaging in mobility. To address the decrease of candidates entering the CPA pipeline, some states plan to introduce or have already introduced legislation to implement licensure pathways that would allow for additional alternatives to licensure in addition to the 150 semester units. They are doing so to reduce barriers to licensure. On February 12, 2024, Minnesota reintroduced legislation that was originally introduced in 2023 that would add an alternative path to licensure of 120 semester units and 2 years of experience. This bill was moved to the Finance Committee by unanimous vote, and CBA staff are monitoring its progress. Additionally, the Oregon Board of Accountancy has indicated interest in broadening licensure alternatives in addition to the required 150 semester units, but has not yet introduced legislation. NASBA's Professional Licensure Task Force is exploring an experiential learning concept, which is intended to address concerns surrounding the decrease of candidates entering the CPA pipeline and would create a substantially equivalent, keyword there, licensure model that does not require 150 semester units. The concept is in the early stages, and staff are monitoring updates from the task force. Additionally, staff are observing the AICPA's National Pipeline Advisory Group and attending meetings of CalCPA's California Pipeline Advisory Group to provide information on CPA statutes and regulations. So this includes a very long presentation. I will now turn it back over to Chair Lotta, and Dominic Franzella will be happy to assist me in answering any difficult questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Center, for that thorough presentation. We thank staff for gathering this information for us, and it's informative for us board members who weren't present during all of that time. So we thank you. Board members, do we have any comments? Ms. Corrigan?
Thank you. Setting that long subject title aside, and I was one of the ones that was around then, but it's nice to have, and one that I have flagged to keep, a document that is so thorough in documenting the history of how it all started and where it has evolved to this day. So important to recognize too, I have no idea back then whether it was referred to as a pipeline issue, as it is now, as kind of the hot topic nationally, but that was considered back then by those involved. And so always been a consideration on, you know, how do we make it possible for candidates, you know, and how do we get them through the process and yet maintain those standards. So I just commend staff on putting this together, and I really appreciate and plan to keep it and refer back to it. It's so important to monitor this very complicated process that everyone is going through to try to arrive at solutions to the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corrigan. Any other committee member comments? Ms. Tu?
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Center, I know you mentioned a couple of states have legislation going in regarding reducing the amount and possibly internship and so forth. I know you mentioned that we will be monitoring those things. Do those states inform us if they do make any changes? Because it will be impacting how we treat those CPA from those states, correct?
So the states are not required to inform us, but they do, NASBA does monitor and provide information on their website, and I am very confident that they will ensure that state boards are made aware of any changes that are enacted in other states.
Ms. Ward, did you still have a question?
I want to just make sure. So we have something in place now, 150 semester units required. So if I'm understanding this, the possible outcome is once NASBA does their research, whatnot, they want to eliminate the 150. Are you just saying have a degree and just go forward?
So let me clarify that if you don't mind. So NASBA is very adamant in the 150 unit requirement. What they are looking at is an alternative to the 30 units that is the difference, if you will, from 120 and 130, and an alternative to how you might satisfy that requirement. And in that, it is an experiential learning model, but they see that more as an alternative to the 30, not as a replacement, if you will, of 150. That is how they're messaging that right now. It's a very fine line, but yes, there would be a pathway for 120 if NASBA's current proposal were adopted by them. Of course, it's then up to individual states to determine what their individual pathways would be.
Okay, thank you.
Any other committee member comments or questions? I'll add mine into the mix. So I know you mentioned that NASBA has information on the website about the states that are substantially equivalent. Is staff monitoring internally as they see changes? I know you mentioned Minnesota. Do we know how many or which other states are also considering making some changes to the regulations in relation to this? Mr. Franzella.
Thank you. At this time, the only state that has actually moved anything is Minnesota. And again, it's just moving through its legislative process. Nothing has taken effect. It does have a delayed implementation of July 1, 26, with the goal being during this period of time, if it should pass out of the Minnesota legislature and become law, that it would allow for NASBA, the ICPA, Minnesota, state boards in general, to minimize the impact on mobility. I think the reality is everybody's, even NASBA, has come to terms with the fact that no matter what the pathways, the alternative pathways are, there will likely be an impact on mobility because not all states have adopted it in the same way. We all apply it similarly and allow for the cross-border practice, but there is a lot of deviations in terms of how states have implemented, as Ms. Sinner had said, in terms of they might not have it on their statutes, they might not have it in their regulations, they may say it one way versus how we say it, and so the impact could be gradual or it could be substantial, and everybody's just trying to figure out how to make it as less bumpy along the way. I think, and I'll give kudos to Mr. Fox back there. They provided a visual on it of two paths, one that it looks like it's going to break, but it's more gradual and, you know, a lot easier to go down instead of all these trees falling in the way and creating all this bumpiness along through the process. So Minnesota, I do know, I anticipate Oregon has been very clear that they will be doing something next year. That's just, they're on a 2-year legislative cycle. They don't have a legislature meeting right now. So I anticipate them, and I do believe South Carolina has language. I'm not sure if it was introduced or not. But those are the 3 states that I'm aware of that actually have something formulated.
Thank you, Mr. Franzella. I have one more question, either Ms. Center or Mr. Franzella, about, so you said that NASBA is adamant about the 150 unit requirement. So as states consider these changes, that's pretty clear, and they're just looking for alternatives of how to obtain the additional 30 units, correct?
I would say that NASBA's hearing from states, but in terms of how their visuals are displayed as if the alternative is a way to compensate for a lack of 150, if that makes sense. There currently is not anything on the table from NASBA that is, for example, more similar to what California had before, which was 120 in 2 years. It is very much trying to make that extra year of experience very structured in a way that they have voiced makes it more equivalent to the 30 unit difference.
Ms. Tu?
So am I hearing you correctly when you say NASBA is still sticking to the 150? It's just that they are looking at possible alternative 30 units that people can do.
Well, they are looking at alternatives, both. They already have implemented one that is on the transcript. It's kind of a way of thinking about it, on the transcript or not on the transcript, right? So there's the 30 units. There's alternatives to how to get those 30 on a transcript, and that would have been what you've heard from us on the ELE, which is at Tulane University right now, right? That is a way of getting those 30 on the transcript, but it's a collaboration between a university and a firm, okay? And then right now, what they're looking at is an alternative to get the 30 not on a transcript. So that would be this structured professional program is, I think, the correct words for the acronym, but it's very much a structured type of process to gain experience that they believe would be equivalent. Now, please don't take what I said to mean that we have a lot of information on what that program is. That's pretty much all the information we have right now. They are continuing to meet the task force and have conversations. And as we gather more information, I'm sure we will provide that to the board.
Thank you. Any additional committee member comments or questions? Seeing none, any public comment here in Sacramento?
Jason Fox of the California Society of CPAs. I just want to underscore that the document the staff put together is a very good summary of the history, and I think it's important for the board to understand the historical components of the education requirements and mobility being coupled together. And as you start to think about pipeline and changes, it's hard and very difficult to not disrupt the other without making, because they're connected, when you make one change, it's going to impact the other ones. And I think as noted, you see some of the actions either on the national level through NASBA and their pipeline task force. AICPA has a national pipeline advisory group, and both similarly looking at what a new national educational licensure model might look like. You know, whatever that ends up being, there's going to be some disruption to mobility most likely as states kind of consider those new models and then recenter around what that might look like. Alternatively, you're probably going to see, states, and probably including additional states, start to pursue their own options, and there's going to be some disruptions related to those state actions. And so over the next few months, year or so, I would suspect there's going to be a number of items brought to you related to considerations of either new national models or how to adjust states that have pursued that. So I would, maybe put this in your favorites section to kind of look at it, because I think it's important as California thinks of what it means for CPAs, California CPAs going across and working in other states, or vice versa, other states or CPAs coming into California. And from a profession standpoint, we're very much engaged in the conversations. We have a working group looking at all these different options. We've invited some of the board staff to be part of that to help kind of advise and provide their input where appropriate. So again, just want to thank the staff for kind of highlighting this, because I think it's important to understand this context. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Mr. Franzella?
Thank you. Before we move on to the rest of the public comments, and I think Mr. Fox touched on it really well, is there's a lot of discussion happening on the pipeline piece, and mobility is being handled tangentially to it in a way. It's not really at the forefront of some of the discussions. There's a lot of concerns about, and they use the term a lot in the Minnesota discussion about breaking mobility and the concerns with that. And so one of the reasons why staff brought this piece together to really try to emphasize that interconnection. It is being talked about nationally, but they're kind of siloing it to some extent and focusing on the pipeline and then the ramifications potentially to mobility. We obviously are, it's a concern because pipeline is, the board has been very clear the pipeline is the kind of the biggest issue we're facing right now. But right behind that, is mobility in some respects. So we want to make sure that this board is well informed about the fact that they probably need to be handled a little bit more hand in hand to a degree, at least in terms of how we're thinking about certain pieces, so that we're really cognizant of the fact that they are interconnected, you know, and our educational requirements weren't necessarily brought to a particular level simply because it made for that 150 was necessary to enter the profession. It was brought along because of mobility, not because of the other way around. So we just want to make sure members are kind of really clear on that, and that our discussions are kind of touching on both subjects concurrently, because a lot of the stuff we bring to you from the UAA from NASBA's task force is really just pipeline driven. They talk about mobility, but it's not a focus. And so we don't want to lose sight of that along the way. So.
Thank you, Mr. Franzella. Ms. Corrigan?
Yes, and another question for Mr. Franzella. So as we are all kind of monitoring, you know, the task force, NASBA has one, AICPA, there are a lot of groups working on this, of course, nationally. And staff obviously are monitoring. Our staff coming up with ideas on a solution for this issue, rather than, you know, being reactive. Are our staff kind of being proactive and kind of jotting down their own ideas of what might work, and also in consideration of mobility?
Mr. Franzella?
Thank you. Yes, obviously, the board last year embarked on Sure CPA, the Students Understanding the Requirements for CPA Licensure project, which it had a certain type of box focused solely on the 150 and enhancing the clarity that exists with our current educational requirements and modernizing them to a degree, but within the box of 150. Staff obviously saw a lot of writing on the wall as the year progressed and as we moved into this year, and things were starting to happen both at the national level, but just between Cal CPA and the Board of Accountancy and things that we were participating in and outreach events that members were doing in the Sure CPA project, that Ms. Center and myself and her team had started kicking around, kind of internally having some discussions on if the board eventually wants to expand the scope of Sure CPA project or add on to it in some capacity, that we could be more involved in the discussion from the board level in terms of alternatives to the 150 or things that are akin to what's going on with NASBA's task force or the CPAG group or the NPAG groups and all of those. And so obviously there's an agenda item later today, 2G, which we'll kind of cover in more detail at that time, that is designed to kind of give the board some of that ability to kind of expand in that environment. But staff are looking at this in concert. We are looking at both educational requirements and substantial equivalency together. So that way, if the board wants to go out and start voicing more, like these are some alternatives you may want to consider, or wants to be more proactive, like you said, then we're in a position to do so once the board kind of gives us that direction. And as you can see in our next meeting with Sunset Review, the educational requirements are part of the discussion there. So I think it's clear that the board probably wants to become more active instead of reactive or listening to what's happening, but being more of a engaging partner in those discussions.
Any other committee member comments? Seeing none, public comment here in Sacramento after Ms. Corrigan's comment. Seeing none, moderator, please open the Q&A for public comment.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, typically bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, and type comment and send it to all panelists. For those who are calling in, *3 to raise your virtual hand. I do have individual identified as Joe. Joe, I'm going to send a request to unmute you. Just click the unmute me button when prompted. You have 5 minutes. I'll do a 30-second warning before your time is up. And I just sent the request to unmute you. And Joe, I'm going to send another request to unmute your microphone.
My name is Joe Collette, and I'm a practicing CPA in California. I really appreciate, the CBA and all it's doing to, address these supply shortages that are affecting all of us and our clients. I'm really concerned about the impacts that the supply shortages are having on the quality of services that clients in my community are receiving. And so I really appreciate, all these efforts to increase the pipeline. But I guess I would just say, I think increasing the pipeline does need to be the #1 priority. And while I appreciate the concerns about mobility, my sort of intuition is that, they're addressable concerns, they would be resolved, and I wouldn't want to see that hold up efforts to increase the pipeline.
Thank you for your comment.
And this is the moderator. Next individual, John Stiller. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone. Give me just a moment. Request has been sent.
California CPA candidate. And I just wanted to share that I don't believe the 150 hour is the pipeline problem. It really has to do with the starting salaries for CPA candidates and staff and the investment that it takes to become a CPA versus the reward and salaries. And I believe a lot of these requirements are just outdated. There's more and more tax professional firms that don't require CPAs. You don't need a CPA to prepare taxes. And with automation of software, there's not going to have the need to be as many CPAs. So until I think there's a greater need for CPAs outside of the tax and audit realm, the move towards advisory, more of the client accounting services, and the benefit of having a CPA to offer those services, students aren't going to see the payoff to get a CPA because the salaries are low considering other professions that require a master's degree and the vigorous exams and all the other compliance requirements that go along with getting the CPA. So for me, the 150 was not a problem. I was able to go back to school, get my master's. It was a great process. I love learning. And it's really more about getting an awareness and the value of having a CPA out to the younger generation. Because right now they don't see the value because the general public doesn't see the value of having a CPA. And that's all. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your public comment. We appreciate your perspective. Moderator, are there any additional public comments?
No, there are not. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Please. Yes, please. Thank you. Being that there is no action on this agenda item, we will move on to agenda item number 4, discussion and possible action on proposed amendments to California Code of Regulations Title 16, Article 2.5, License Status, and Article 12, Continuing Education. I will turn it back over to Ms. Center, the Chief of our Licensing Division, for her presentation.
Thank you, Chair Lotta. So the purpose of this agenda item is to provide this committee an opportunity to discuss the broad changes staff are recommending to Title 16 of the CCR's Article 2.5, as well as Article 12. These address continuing educations, or I will refer to it as CE for short. Staff are requesting that the board appoint no more than 2 members to work closely with staff to finalize proposed regulatory language for board consideration. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank CalCPA and NASBA for their willingness to share their experiences, engage in problem-solving discussions with staff. I'm excited to know that NASBA is also looking at some of the same issues we're trying to improve upon. As a reminder, CPAs renewing in an active status must complete 80 hours of CE in the 2 years immediately preceding their license expiration date. Currently, the regulations allow CPAs to earn CE through a variety of different program types, such as live presentations, self-study, and webcasts. At its September 2023 meeting, the board discussed improvements that could be made to the CE regulations, and those improvements would address the clarity of the regulations, improvements to the regulatory review CE course, and the ability for the board to react timely to developments in teaching and learning approaches. Staff have reviewed the current regulations and recommend exploring the following 4 changes, or change categories, I think is probably more accurate. They can be found starting near the end of page 2 if you want to follow along. First, we want to allow for emerging learning approaches and technologies by drafting regulatory language that would allow CE providers to implement these new approaches without the need for us to change our regulations first. For example, the specificity of the program types which qualify, including such program types as live presentations, self-study, and webcasts, makes it difficult for CE providers to utilize new learning approaches or technology that may not fall within the current schema. The future regulations could focus more on the foundations of a quality program, such as developing learning goals, learning objectives, and learning activities instead of delivery modes of the course. Taking this approach would allow CE providers to utilize new learning approaches and emerging technologies in continuing education more quickly. Second, increase clarity and reduce repetition by reorganizing the content, creating a definition section, removing cross-references when appropriate, and removing language that is repeated for each program type. The current regulations in Article 12 could be clarified and organized in a better way. Rethinking how the sections of the article are organized should help. For example, instead of addressing how to calculate credit hours with somewhat different requirements under each program type, the regulations could be organized with a section that solely addresses options for how a CE provider could calculate credit hours. Also, the addition of a definition section will reduce some repetition and eliminate some of the cross-reference needs. Third, update subject areas by considering additional non-technical subjects that may contribute to the professional competence of a licensee. For example, this board has shown support for the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Therefore, the regulations might include additional non-technical subject areas such as world languages and harassment prevention. Fourth, improve the regulatory review course by exploring areas for improvement such as the current renewal process. For example, the regulations could improve upon the approval process for the course. Additionally, the board may wish to explore other changes to the course now that it is in the process of removing the PEP exam requirement, assuming that is enacted soon. So given all of this information I've shared with you, staff recommend, the CPC recommend that the CBA direct staff to explore these changes to CCR Articles 2.5 and 12, and that the CBA president appoint no more than 2 CBA members to work closely with staff to finalize proposed regulatory language for future consideration. That concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Chair Latta, and will do my best to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Center. Do I have a board member who wishes to make a motion? Ms. Corrigan?
Yes, thank you. I move to recommend staff's recommendation in the document that the CBA president direct appoint no more than 2 members to work closely with staff in connection with these updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corrigan. Ms. Tu?
I will second that.
Thank you. Any additional board member discussion or comments? I have one question. Ms. Center, you mentioned in the last section, improve regulatory review course, that the CBA may wish to separate the regulatory review course for new licensees. I was wondering what prompted that potential suggestion. Are there topics that pertain to new licensees that are currently not included in the regulatory review course that we currently have?
Not so much topics, but that was something that came up at one of our prior board discussions when we were talking about using the regulatory review course, requiring that sooner because of the elimination of PEP. That was one of the topics that we discussed. I don't know if it will be an alternative that we end up proposing in draft regulations, but at this point in time, we do encourage us to engage in that option or that consideration with a board member or two.
Thank you. Any additional committee comments? Seeing none, any public comments here in Sacramento on this item? We have Mr. Jason Fox approaching from Cal CPA.
Jason Fox is with California Society of CPAs. So we're very much in support of the board's staff's project here. I think it's an important, long overdue reevaluation of the C regulation updates and clarifications, particularly looking at new technologies and modalities of learning and being a little bit more flexible as things change. Specific to the point on the regulatory review course, we're very much supportive of kind of looking at tightening up some of those requirements now that's going to be serving an additional purpose. I would note on the consideration of a course for new licensees, I think there's the distinction I would look at it is maybe there's your first kind of iteration of understanding a lot of these California Accountancy Act and rules and regulations at the first time, whereas it might be a little bit of a different experience if you're going to it as a seasoned CPA that's been licensed for 10 plus years. So I think the way somebody seeing it for the first time might learn it, it might be different than somebody that just needs an update on changes. And so I think that would be the consideration I would think about in the project. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. That comment was very insightful. Thanks. Any other additional comments here in Sacramento for public? Seeing none, moderator, please open the Q&A for public comment.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you're online and would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, type comment, and send it to all panelists. If you are calling in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. At this time, I see no requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Ms. Reed, please take a vote.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Yen Tu, Teresa Thompson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
and Doug Aguilera.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. That adjourns our Committee on Professional Conduct meeting for today. Thank you.
LC will start in 5 minutes at 10 o'clock.